Hey guys, welcome back everybody on this lovely Tuesday afternoon. And I know you guys probably saw me early this morning, but if you didn't, yes, I have a show. I stay on TV, sort of like Steve Harvey or LinkedIn. I stay on TV, but we're busting out this another edition of Vulnerability Matters. I'm with my lovely hostess with the mostest. First, want to send a shout out today to all women. Happy International Women's Day. Of course, my favorite woman, my mom. Appreciate her. I could not be here without her. And I'm sure that semblance rolls across everyone's tongue out there and watching us today. We thank you for tuning in. Those that are live, please drop in the comments where you're tuning in from, including Kelly's dog who want to chat with us today. Tell us where you're tuning in from. Drop in the comments or any questions that you have, because we're talking about vulnerability matters, but we're also talking about in the essence of these courses, these micro courses that we're doing. That we want to put them together with Teach Your Brilliance, and we've come to this collaboration where we want to bring what I believe is the forefront of the next level of leadership into the dynamic for everybody to get it. And we just want to be the first to put it out there for you guys. All right. So thank you for coming out. What's going on, Kelly? How are you today?
I'm even better now that I saw that intro that you did. I mean, you warned
Yes.
me that you had gotten creative, but I felt I was like rolling up my sleeves. I feel like I'm already feeling a little empowered today because of International Women's Day, but
Yes, absolutely.
that was amazing. So I'm excited and I'm happy to be here. And if I wasn't excited to be back here with you, I definitely am now after that great
Yes.
introduction. So
Yes, I say,
yeah,
we when we do stuff, and I know a few people in the link stream, in the live stream arena, they taught me a few things. So I try to show them that I'm listening and try to apply some. But I also like playing with things to kind of get a new vibe. And I say, oh, this would be nice. And of course, I had to keep the funky beat because
I
I
love it.
love the beat, the tempo, get you guys in the groove and get you moving. But we're talking about vulnerability today, and we're talking about lessons that we're learning in vulnerability. And a lot of times I know that you guys hear me talk about that a lot, but it is something that not only do I talk about, but it's what I live, and it's what I believe, and it's what I breathe. So when we're talking about being vulnerable, in the essence of that, I take it as a whole total package of who I am. And I don't A lot of people like to go into vulnerability as a barrier package of where it's just there to shield you from things, mistakes, shames, judgment, things of that nature. But I feel empowered by that because a mistake is only an aptitude or ability to learn. If we're not making mistakes, we're not learning anything. And if we're not making mistakes to learn from, then we are stunning our growth. And vulnerability is really the key to that, and understanding that, you don't know everything. I don't care how you try to make like you do. Someone along the line will find you out.
Mm.
If not, more likely sooner than later. So when you're living in that facade and you're hiding behind those barriers, you're not tending to be 100% authentic, and you're not even really empowering yourself to be the kind of individual you want, whether it be a leader, whether it just be a co-worker, whether it just be in relationships or those kind of dynamics. You want to be who you are, and you want to feel comfortable in that. And the lessons that we learn through being vulnerable are priceless. And though we talk about from time to time, we talk about what it is and what it means with the exposure to being harmed, or to put yourself in some kind of danger. uh, the positive definitely outweighs the negative. And when you apply that to your life with growing, you'll be surprised at how much being vulnerable will push you out of a shell or a place where you never really knew existed. And it'll bring you to an area of just like, wow, I didn't even know I could do that. And isn't that what we all want when we're growing? If we're going to have that moment of
Mhm.
saying, yo, I don't even know how I did that. I don't know how I did that. But we're going to go through the different types of things. But I want to give Kelly opportunity. Kelly, what are some of the lessons that you learned in being vulnerable, or you're learning? Because it's a constant teaching that goes on.
It is a constant teaching. And, I'm obviously my educational background. I always have my teacher hat on, and I always also would consider myself a lifelong learner. So one of the things that I've learned to do is to always find the lesson in whatever it is that is happening, particularly in some of the more negative situations. Of course, there's lessons that
Mhm.
come from positive situations as well. But,
Mhm.
I am consistently And this is what I love about your conversation, because you're always talking so much about vulnerability and the need to shift the way we think about vulnerability, and the need to change our mindset
Mhm.
around vulnerability. And I think that that's something that, because I've been able to do that, recognizing that life happens for you, right? There's nothing
Right.
that's happening to us. And so I'm always looking for, what can I learn out of this situation? And there's just been one of the biggest things, I think, is building a business, as you know, and you're creating amazing things for your own business. And I've learned so much just through building a business, in terms of the importance of vulnerability, and learning, and not only learning, but more so talking about the little lessons that you learn in business. For example, I was working with someone for many, many years, helping them build their business. And when things shifted, the original conversation, for example, of looking towards a partnership, completely changed. And
Mhm.
instead of it growing into a partnership, it fell more into an employee role. And I really had to be able to take that lesson and be vulnerable on a number of different levels, with like leaving my salary, leaving a secure job,
Yeah.
and being able to say, like, this is what I want to do, and I'm afraid to do it, but I need to make this move. And even asking for help, like, all of these things, I think, are ways, or are times where we might expose more vulnerability to the level of where it's discomforting, but or uncomfortable. But you learn so much through that. I think, like, help is my biggest thing. One of the biggest
Yeah.
things I've learned lately is to ask for help, and to allow that help. And in order to ask and allow yourself to be helped, you have to be vulnerable, right? There's an admission
Mhm.
of, I can't do it all, or I don't have it, on my own. And yet it's a beautiful lesson when you see all of those people that you connect with, that come forward to help you. Your tribe starts to form, and things like that. And so there's so much about vulnerability that I think, if people really want to join the conversation and recognize how important it is, there are lessons around every little corner of life.
Yeah, there are lessons, and a lot of times we it's sort of like when I think about lessons, we oftentimes go back to the only dynamic that we really comprehend on a total level, and that's school. When we think about lessons, that's the first thing that comes to our
Mhm,
mind. But life teaches lessons that we
mhm,
so aptly pass over, or we don't pay attention to, or we're not aware of, and we're not self-aware of. There's so
mhm,
many things that happen, and I really got a keen eye of that from my dad. He wasn't the greatest scholar, but he was a life learner. So when you look at that, in the essence was book things wasn't his thing, but he caught on by watching, observing, understanding, just the dynamic of life, common sense.
mhm,
Those kind of things are which I think, don't even mention common sense now. I think
mhm,
so many people have taken for granted that common sense is not even common anymore. The
mhm.
things that we used to just say, okay, this is how this goes. We're looking for so many other ways to be deep about things that we bypass the simplicity of
Yes.
what it takes to get something done. And
Mhm,
everybody is just such an expert. I use that loosely in my profile, not for the matter of not of what I talk about or what I know about, but the essence of targeting that word, because everyone's an expert.
mhm,
Now everyone knows so much, yet and still, when you look at the application of, there are a lot of people who are not applying the simple things that they know to do. And this is where vulnerability keeps us in check. It's sort of like a conscience for ourselves, for
mhm,
us, in order to understand that, there are things and places and ways that we haven't measured up, we haven't reached, we haven't attained. So therein lies, there needs to be some humility in that. And I'm
mhm,
segue into that because that is my next process in what we're discussing today. Being vulnerable takes humility, and it takes you from a place of not knowing, because I know this is pretty much where we all can see and agree. Oh man, they know so much. The worst person that you can work with, or it's a pet peeve of mine, and you guys let me know if you feel the same. If I start talking to someone and they say I know, That is my pet peeve, right? And once you told me I know, and I go back to the lessons I've learned as a kid. Dad told me never tell anybody you know because you're closing the door on what you don't know. And he said even if you know it, listen to it because they may bring it to you differently. So in the essence of you knowing it, just to say you the sky is blue, well, it's easy for us to say, yeah, I know, right? But hear about what's going to be coming along in the conversation with that. The sky is blue, but maybe tomorrow it'll be, there's something to follow
Mhm.
behind that. But if you say most times people are going to cut off from you. They're going to cut you off at the knees at that point and say, oh, okay, I don't have anything else to say. And you lose the opportunity of learning, if not more than what you already know, a different way to approach the thing you do know.
Mhm.
Because there's more than one way to have knowledge, there's more than one way to apply it. So if someone else has done it, they might have a different experience than you. But being humble allows you, and that humility allows you to take that in, whether you know it or not. It's not going to take anything less from you if you do, but it'll take a lot from you saying you do and someone don't continue what they're trying to tell you.
I what I love about what you're talking about with this, really being humble when it comes to expertise and knowledge,
Hmm.
is I think that in the world today, for coaches, consultants, all the influencers and experts out there, I think there is a certain pressure to act like you are the expert and you know all the things. And if you
Yes.
look at a lot of the big influencers, out there in the coaching and consulting space, there definitely is this air of I am the guru, I am the genius, I'm the one that
Mhm.
knows it all. And I really think that, one, personally, that turns me off, again,
Yeah.
as someone who I recognize there's always lessons to learn. But,
Always.
I just think about how you say, closed off to what more there is to learn. But, more importantly, to me, people like that are closed off to growth, right?
Yes.
Like if I am just gonna say I know everything about X, Y, and Z, not only am I shutting off the potential to learn, but I'm closing off my own potential to grow as a coach, as a consultant, as an expert, as a human. And I do think for people that are in those leadership positions, it does take humility to be able to say, I don't know it all, right? And to expose that vulnerability. But the benefit of what's going to come on the other end, the collaboration, the deeper conversation, the being able to see things from a different point of view, is so valuable. And it's such a tragedy that I think we have that pressure put on us to have to pretend like we know all of the things. Because it's
Mhm.
really, as far as I know, if I'm not consistently learning, I'm doing a disservice to my clients. I can't serve
Yeah.
if I'm not consistently and growing and learning myself. So I love this point that you're making around humility, and especially with knowledge.
Because it takes that, right? And John brings up a good point here. Even if you're positioned to be the expert, being open to learning from others that join the conversation
Mhm.
is a plus. Because in essence of that, when I have these vulnerable conversations and when I'm carrying this along, yes, I've embodied this because this is who I am. But everyone don't move like I move. So,
Mhm.
with that being the case, for me to help someone, I have to know how they move. So, by me being an expert and me putting everything on you in the steps that I've taken, yes, that gives me an expertise in how I embrace vulnerability. That does not apply to you. So,
Mhm.
me being able to be humble enough to listen that my way is not the highway or the only way,
Mhm. Mhm.
that makes me more affordable and being able to be more practical to even help a client, to even see the need. Because sometimes we let this facade of an expertise really get in our way and they become blindfolds to who we're supposed to be providing this expert service to. When we
Mhm.
think about that, and he said something that was very, very key to me in understanding joining the conversation, listening to, regardless of how I take on the information you're giving me, knowing that, hearing you say that, listening for things, being self-aware in the struggle of you saying that, seeing how affecting you says that, all of those things play a big part in how I move with working with clients, potential clients.
Mhm.
It's a movement of how, okay, I know where they're going to fit in at. I
Mhm.
know what's going to be best for them. And if I come off with this pretentiousness of always, yes, I'm the expert, you don't
Mhm.
know. It does everyone a disservice. Not only does it do your client or potential client a disservice, it does you and your reputation a disservice. Because best believe me, if every coach or consultant was an expert, there wouldn't be over 4 to 5 million of them walking
Yeah.
around, right? I think by
Yeah.
now, someone would have coined that expertise to be the only one in the field. And seeing that that's not the case,
Yeah.
we got a lot of work to do, right?
Well, and vulnerability, I think, is what helps us stand out
Yeah.
among the experts. There's thousands of other people out there that help create online courses, right? But
Mhm.
whatever my special piece of knowledge is, and I like to call it our brilliance, right? We all have this
Mhm.
special brilliance. My
Yes.
brilliance is what some people need, and it's not what others need, right? But when we move and when we look for who we want to join conversations with, who we want to bring on for mentorship or coaching, there's that connection piece that draws us to that person. And without being vulnerable, you can't make those connections. And you can't stand out to the people who are really looking for your unique piece that you have.
And that is the key thing about it because we what you have someone needs, right? And
Hmm.
I'm under the mindset of saying no one can give what you have. Not
Hmm.
under the mindset, just the reality of, regardless if we've all went through the same situation, how we dealt with it, how we came through it, how we overcame it is different for each and every individual. We both could be, just say, addiction for one. We can have the same addiction. We can be
Hmm.
struggling with it in a lot of the same ways. But the way that they adapt to us and the way that we position ourselves to overcome it or come out of it is
Hmm.
totally different. So therein lies, I also go back to sharing your story. The power of your story is so unique in itself that others can just draw courage from your story. Had they not been in that situation or not, the courageousness of hearing how you came through will draw something in that other individual that has heard it, have them to be courageous in something maybe totally different.
Hmm.
But hearing how you came through and overpowered whatever it was that was an obstacle to you, man, it takes a lot. And it's one of those things that brings me joy in working with that. And being humble is like really like key to me. I
Hmm.
love being humble. There's just something about having that humility and spirit that you can work with others. Others can work with you. Others can feel it. It's not hypocritical.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Catherine says we all have different experiences, which can certainly help others. Being
Yeah.
humble will allow us to partake. Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And
Mhm.
Shell says that's what allows you to shine brightly,
Yeah,
right, Kelley?
absolutely. Hmm. Yeah.
Being humble. And in the essence of that, that brings us to our second step and our second part of this. And we're talking about what it is, being vulnerable. It takes courage.
Yeah.
Not everyone uh how should I put this? Not everyone can be vulnerable. And it does take courage to be vulnerable. But
Hmm.
I think it takes the courage that it takes is because we don't realize what to be vulnerable with. And if I can go a little deeper in that, understanding that it does take courage to let someone into the inner circle, right?
Hmm.
But there's a lot that's in the inner circle that can be beneficial to those in the external. So if we get an understanding of how we release that from us to someone else, we empower others. We give
Hmm.
others the opportunity to say, "Oh, wow, you going through that too?" Because once we look about it, it's Solomon saying, I always have to go biblical. Solomon says nothing new under the sun. So if he's told me this, and if I believe that to any extent rather, then I have to realize that maybe what I've been through, somebody else has been through. Remember, old
Hmm.
people used to say that all the time. But you ain't doing nothing I ain't tried. Or your parents used to tell you, you can't pull that over on me because I already done that. Right?
Right.
It's truth in that. But taking the courage and understanding that being vulnerable, it takes courage. It takes courage to say, I don't know,
Hmm.
especially in the dynamic that we're in now, like you had mentioned, with the expertise tag on everyone. And
Hmm.
everyone is just this pressure to just be this individual that knows it all. And the funny thing about that, if it can even be called funny, everyone knows that you don't.
Yeah.
including those that are applying the pressure.
Yeah.
They know that you don't know it all, right? But they hold you to this standard of hypocrisy because they said, you call yourself that, you know.
Hmm. I think back to just my days in the classroom, and I
Mm,
think about myself, who I was as a student growing up, and then, as a teacher, having that different role and having students. And I just think about the courage it takes to raise a hand in class.
oh
And
man.
I was that student that was like, you could not pay me to ask a question because it was scary, right? And because of,
Mhm.
because of the misbeliefs that I think we're raised with of what that means when you raise a question. And back in my day, it meant you didn't know. Maybe it meant you weren't paying attention. Maybe it meant that you were not smart enough, right? And luckily, education is starting to shift where we're recognizing the importance of being curious, the importance of asking, the importance of inquiry. But I just think about how much courage it takes to even do something as simple as raising your hand and saying, can I ask a question? Right. And just the opportunities that are missed when you can't conjure up that courage, and whether we're vulnerable around emotions, whether we're vulnerable around what we're going through, whether we're showing vulnerability around, as I mentioned earlier, asking for help.
Mhm.
It's all scary, and in a world when we're, when everyone talks about being fearless, I'm going to guess most people come across having to conjure up a little bit of that courage almost on a daily basis when it comes to being vulnerable. Yeah, Shell, right? We were shut down. It was never a positive thing.
Yeah.
And that was vulnerability. Raising your hand opened yourself up to being vulnerable. And it still, I think, in some ways, I still think that trickles along with us. And so, it's not just being courageous, but I also think the importance with these conversations is recognizing those that are courage, that have the courage and that have been courageous to show their vulnerable side and to be willing to allow others to learn from it.
And when I said earlier that it takes courage to be there, Shell said this led me to stop sharing out loud. I remained
Mhm.
curious, but I moved in silence. And this is where the courage part so sadly have to come into
Mhm.
play. It's not that we
Mhm.
don't have the courage to be vulnerable, because ourselves, that's a part of us. That's who we are. So we really have the ability to be vulnerable with the things that
Yeah.
we choose to at any point in time. But it becomes something that takes courage based upon the external. How you looked
Mhm.
at, how you viewed. Is it
Yeah.
shame? Is it judgment? How are they looking at me? How are they doing things that may change my perspective or thinking of? And
Mhm.
we live in this culture of where everyone is you're either getting blamed, it's your fault, you had something to do with it, whatever you did, even if it was wrong a long time ago. I mean, there's nothing forgiven, and those kind of things are putting us in a place of why would I because I had a potential client ask me that the other day, and they said, yeah, man, I saw a video of yours, and they said I was pretty peaked, right? He said, and I find this a lot when I'm talking to men, women that I find and I talk to, I don't have as much. They're more willing to share, divulge, and talk about some things that really bothers them. But men, I find it a hard thing, and I say that that's due to a lot of the culture as well, how we were raised,
Mhm.
the stigma upon how we are supposed to behave, the stigma upon if I'm vulnerable, then that means I'm soft. If I'm
Yeah.
vulnerable, that means I can't take care of my responsibilities. It's the most ludicrous thing I ever heard in my life.
Mhm.
But it is one of those things as you start as a young boy, when you fall off a bike, your dad, get up, boy, crying, no crying.
Yeah.
These kind of things trigger a lot in men, and they're continuously holding things. So it's going to take a little more courage to get
Mhm.
to them, but that is still all external.
Mhm.
That has nothing to do with you and you
Yeah.
being vulnerable. And it has nothing to do with the way that you view vulnerability. It's how someone has put that stigma on you. So that's where the courage has to come in at. It has nothing to do with you. And I applaud those who take those steps and move toward that, because you're only empowering yourself. And to have you and this show, what you said here, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
There's so many that remain curious, have questions, but they move in silence for fear of. And that's another one of my pet peeves. Fear, you
Mhm.
know, it's sin, and now you can't shut me up, right? This is absolutely, girlfriend, because you can't be quiet now. Definitely, you can't be quiet, and I know that you have a lot, and you're moving toward a lot, and these are the things that we want to see excel and propel you to those kind of heights that we can celebrate you because you're worth being celebrated. So I love that. I love that. That push us through. We're moving pretty good here. We move pretty good. Now this is my best. This is one of my good ones right here. This is one of mine, and I love this one. And I'm gonna get it up in a minute, y'all. Give me a second here. There you go. This is one of my favorites. It breaks down barriers,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And you say, wow, how does it break down barriers? It puts you in places that are vulnerability puts you in places to get answers, right? That's a short way of putting it. Because vulnerability is saying that there's something that maybe I'm not good at, I don't understand, I need help with, I'm not moving well with, there's a misunderstanding in, I'm not capable of. Vulnerability is your acknowledgement of those things. That's really what vulnerability, if I can get really like scientific with it, right? I got Carla in here too, so she'll talk to us scientifically. And what that does, that gives the ability for, I call it the sender and the receiver, right? So you're sending these things out as a sender. I really can't do this. I don't understand this. Could you help me with this? I can't help. I mean, I need help with this. You're sending those things out. Now,
Mhm.
oftentimes the receiver, which is whoever we come across that we're sending this out to, sometimes they're a good receiver. It's sort of like cable. It's sort of like Wi-Fi sometimes. My Wi-Fi, not all the time it gets good reception. Sometimes it cuts in and out. Sometimes it stalls me. Sometimes I freeze, right? And I'm sending out signals, but I got a receiver that's not all of that good. So this is where we come down to the barriers. We put everything or every bad reception that we've had in being a sender of vulnerability. And now with each and every opportunity, each and every experience, we're building barriers.
Mhm.
So we say, okay, yeah, I remember so and so. Yeah, I told them this, and man, they went and told my mom and everybody. I'm not telling them anything no more. Or I remember this at the job, and they went and told my boss, and now everybody know my business. I'm not fooling with them no more. See, so after a while, you have barriers covering you,
Mhm.
which are good if you want to stay in jail, if you want to stay protected, if you want to stay closed in. Barriers are good, but what vulnerability says is that okay, I'm gonna break these down. Yeah,
Mhm.
you hurt me. Yes, it did hurt, absolutely. Not taking nothing from it. Was I troubled by what happened? Absolutely. Okay, so what do I do now?
Mhm.
I have to move forward. And I'm going to have to build relationships again. I'm going to have to work with people again. I'm going to even have to love again. So therein lies vulnerability tells me those barriers are no good for me
Mhm.
because those same barriers that keeping you out, they keeping stuff to help me grow from coming in. And vulnerability allows us to break those down.
When I see this piece right here, the vision that actually comes to my mind is when someone holds their hand out asking for help. And it's just
Mhm.
like I always think if I don't hold my hand out and ask for help, then my hand won't be taken, right? And
Mhm.
so just by being vulnerable, it's just that initial outreach of saying like hold my hand, right? And that alone makes that just that initial connection, breaks down that initial barrier. And who knows what goes from there on all different levels. And I think it's a really big piece. I think that we are in this space where we have been taught that barriers are good, that when we feel emotion, we're taught to raise the wall. And this isn't just helping us break the wall down, it's actually reaching out and saying, if you're on the other side of that wall, help me over, you know, and let's do it hand in hand. And so it's just not, it's such a beautiful opportunity, not just for giving and receiving, but also walking hand in hand with somebody, either in a beautiful collaboration or a new partnership or whatever it may be. But it's so powerful in that way when we're talking about, what vulnerability can do to really break a lot of the barriers that we see today with building different kinds of relationships.
And it's key, though we
Mhm.
don't accept it, even if we don't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
There's some kind of vulnerability that's going on constantly all the time.
Mhm.
right? There's
Yeah.
and I call it sort of like a visual give and take. Though we may not put the name on it, we may not name it, or we may not acknowledge that that's what's going on. But even in the essence of relationships, there's vulnerability that's being there. There's vulnerability that's created there. There's cultivating there. A
Mhm.
relationship that you have, whether it be boss, whether it be spouse, whether it be children, there's some kind of relationship there that there's a vulnerability piece there because someone has to give in. Someone
Mhm.
has someone has to say, okay, for the lack of this continuing, I'll take this side, you take that side. That's
Mhm.
exactly what vulnerability is, the sender and the receiver, like I said before. So there are points and times in our lives that we're constantly moving in this vulnerable space. But we don't allow it to be called that simply because we understand the definitions to say what it means. But
Mhm.
the application of vulnerability is very individual. I can apply vulnerability to me to mean a totally different thing than you can to you.
Right.
And my perception of it and how I deal with it is totally different than you. So the barriers that you may want to build, that you may want to bring, that you may want to build up and enclose yourself in, I can say, looking at those barriers, they make no sense to me.
Mhm.
So for us to blanket vulnerability to everybody, meaning the same thing, is really not true, and we can't do that. So by breaking down those barriers, it allow us to come in contact, build those connections, build those relationships. It actually works sort of like how a discernment does. Kind of like
Yeah.
makes you see that okay, this one not so much. This one here, oh man, it's great to be vulnerable with that. And you only
Mhm.
know that through the application of, I don't know if I could be vulnerable with you unless I be vulnerable with you.
Right.
There's no pretest and say, okay, man, I can tell Kelley everything by just looking at her. I know she won't tell everything. There's no pretest in that.
Right.
you know, so we
Mhm.
have to be able to have those barriers breaking down and we have to have that vulnerability break them down for us so we can move forward in that. And in the essence of moving forward in that, we continue to move forward. I am loving this because we is hitting it. We is hitting it. I know I got the teacher on. I know she about to kill me about my English, right? We
Yeah.
is.
Mhm. I
But
was
it's
not an English teacher, so you don't have to worry
so
about
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. So sometimes things get good to you. You just skip past all that. But vulnerability also evokes empathy,
that. Mhm.
and this I think we do not have a lot of. We do not have enough of with people because we use it as maybe it's misuse at points in times by certain individuals. Of course, anything that's out there can be. People could take advantage of you being vulnerable as well.
Mhm.
So those things do have an opportunity of happening. But when you that empathy, speak a little bit, Kelly, about that empathy and what that means to you when I'm vulnerable and I invoke that in you. That brings something in you that it's quite amazing to see actually.
It really is, and it's funny that this is one of the points that we're talking about because it was either it might have been yesterday where I came across and shared on my LinkedIn an article written by Forbes about how empathy is one of the new soft skills that we need to start seeing in leadership. And
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot around it. And, to me, and I used to teach my students actually about empathy. And I used to tell them the difference between sympathy and empathy is that empathy, you can actually put yourself in people's shoes and understand how they feel.
Mhm,
And it's not about feeling sorry for, it's about feeling the sorrow. And
mhm,
so, I think when it comes to empathy, it 100% evokes it 100% makes you vulnerable because empathy is when you're conjuring up these emotions, right, that other people are feeling. And for many people, emotions are scary. For many people, as you mentioned, showing emotions was taught to not be a positive thing. I mean, I am not a male, but in my household, we didn't cry unless we were bleeding or broken. I mean, so even as a female,
yeah.
my parents were like, is there a broken bone? Are you bleeding? Because then I don't know why you have tears. Right. And so I come from that's just the culture that I grew up in. So to not just allow yourself to feel emotion, but open yourself even farther to take that chance to pick up and feel someone else's emotion, that really requires a lot of vulnerability because I think where many of us were raised in that space where negative emotion, we do anything we can to avoid. negative emotion, right? So with empathy, it's like, why would I possibly want to take on his pain? I do what I can to avoid my own pain, but it really does require that. And as I'm seeing in a lot of current trends and conversations, empathy we're recognizing is something that is crucial in our society today, with the culture that we're shifting to. And for anybody that's out working with teams or doing any kind of leadership, this is where the conversation is going.
Yes, and it's moving toward that. And
Mhm,
I think I was talking. I'm always talking to people, and I talk to people a lot. And I well, when I say I'm talking to people, I'm really saying I'm listening to people because I'm all the time on Zooms. I'm all the time in shows. I'm all the time not necessarily interviewing people, but I get a lot of my expertise through others, right?
mhm,
And I get that based upon the fact that I listen and interpret. And those are key skills that not only just leaders, us as general humanity, we need we need to acquire if we don't have, and if we do have, we need to become experts in them.
mhm,
Listening to others and understanding value of others. And this is where the empathy holds all the weight because it's giving me an ability to understand and share the feelings of someone else. And
mhm.
that's where the vulnerability gives you an open door that allows you to do that. How amazing it is when, because we get it twisted all the time. I got sympathy for you, but that's not really what we mean. And we're
Right.
not really on the same page with that. But
Mhm.
how I can know your value to some extent, or how I can appreciate you, I'll put it to that way. How I can appreciate your value is to have empathy in who you are, and that's just me understanding some of the things that you've been through. This has
Yeah.
been such a hard thing to understand, even with race and understanding different nationalities and even understanding diversity and because we don't have empathy to say, okay, that person's different than me. That's their value.
Right.
Diversity is value, right? It's a
Mhm.
monetary value. I mean, it's not a monetary value that you can put a price on. It's a value that exceeds all other things. Because if you're different than me, you have a different perspective to get things done than I do.
Right.
And that's automatically a plus. But we look at that as a turnoff and we look at that as an obstacle to me continue to hold on to the things and the ways that I want to do things. And
Mhm.
empathy and invoking that, that's why it's so much. I don't think the Great Recession had too much more to do with that than the pandemic itself, but leaders are starting to understand, corporations are starting to understand that, look, people that work from home, they've gotten more done. Studies have already shown it. Zooms now, you have Zoom meetings. You may hear the dog in the background. You may hear the baby crying. I
Mhm.
mean, we're encompassing all of this as life now, which it has always been. But now it's appropriate to accept that and
Yeah.
understand that. So now, me as your leader, me as your C suite, me as you having whatever responsibility I have over you in the workplace or beyond, now I have to understand that, because I had a boss tell me he was on the zone. It was about 40 of us or something. And
Mhm.
his kid kept turning off his camera in the meeting. Now he's C-suite guy. He's talking and giving his dissertation, his presentation, and his kid he was holding just kept smacking the camera, which I thought was
Mhm.
hilarious. And then most of the people on the Zoom thought was hilarious, but he got a little agitated by it. And one
Sure.
of the ladies that was on the Zoom said she picked up her kid and held her kid in the Zoom. And she's like, "Oh, you're not the only one that
Mhm.
has this." But she said, "I'm glad you see all of us can't be perfect all the time." Now, I really thought it was shots fired, right? It really
Yeah.
was. But I thought it was so necessary because at
Mhm.
that point in time, she hit him with the empathy to where he had a visual of understanding.
Yeah.
Everybody don't have it all together. And you're on here telling us these things as if you have. And here you have your child disrupting a meeting, so being vulnerable in which she was, and even saying that, and even allowing that to be known, because her
Mhm.
kid wasn't making noise, and we would have never knew that her kid was sitting there at her feet. But
Right.
she picked that up to show her vulnerability, to invoke that empathy, and that's exactly the kind of examples that we need to set in leadership and beyond.
Mhm.
Great stuff, great stuff,
Yeah.
great stuff. Man, we are moving right along. Hope you guys got questions. Drop them in, drop them in. We want to hear from you. We thank y'all that has been participating. You got any questions in the chat, drop them in there. We want to hear. We going to the next one, which is really the highlight the highlight of this whole thing in the essence of it. And this is the reason why I always get excited, right? Vulnerability encourages
Mhm.
vulnerability. And this is the reason why I talk about it. This is the reason why I train about it. This is the reason why we're doing courses. We're going to be creating courses about it because we need to create safe spaces. And that safe spaces does not just mean the word safe, it means the culture
Mhm.
of where people are. They need to feel that because we know if you listen to anything Brene Brown has said or done or talked about in any of her information, you get the understanding that a space has to be created. And that space has to be created in culture. And who's in charge of creating that culture? It can be you. Individuals can definitely create those culture. You can create that culture within your realm. A lot of people say, I can't be like that. I was like that in my job. I wasn't liked all the time. I wasn't invited to everything. I didn't get invited to all the Christmas parties or whatever, but people got a vision of who I was. So when they worked with me or they did things with me, they treated me in the space that I created. And I
Mhm.
wasn't one that people came to with the gossip. And all of that was the way that I carried myself. And a lot of the vulnerability allows us to carry ourselves truly who we are. And when people find out truly who you are, you will stay away from a lot of the things that you really don't want to have anything with anyway. Because you
Yeah.
show people that, no, I don't play those games. I'm not the kind of person. This is what I do. This is who I am. Eventually, if you continue that consistently, people respect that. And once they respect that and see that's who you are, you will encourage others to say, okay, he's like he is, regardless of whatever goes on. Maybe I can be like I am. Maybe I can stop having this facade of I'm this way here and I'm this way at the Christmas party, or I'm this way at the meeting, or I'm this way at the training. You act in five different ways and it's the same person. So
Mhm.
vulnerability does encourage the ability to be vulnerable.
You know, without getting too deep on the world's current events, I really believe that the thread of our universe is changing.
Hmm.
And there is such a call for shifting our culture and how we think. And I hear a lot of people ask, and I come across this with clients who, they have a calling to create a course because they feel like they recognize the contribution of sharing their expertise. But then like imposter syndrome pops up and they think that their expertise isn't good enough, or they think that it's not going to be valuable. And I'm always hearing these questions of like, what can we do? What can we do? And this on the screen is exactly what every single person can do that I believe will help shift and rethread who we are as a society, right? It's all of us collectively being willing to show vulnerability, to put our hand out so someone else can grab it, whether they need to grab it in support or whether they're grabbing it to support us. But I think this is how we as a culture can reframe and reconnect and really shift what it is that we do. And when people think like, who am I? I'm just one person. Am I really going to make that big of an impact? The answer is yes, because when we're talking about vulnerability, it's a domino effect.
Hmm.
If I'm willing to show my vulnerability, I mean, for anybody who has even been willing to show a little bit of vulnerability on social media, like this happened to me today. Does anyone, has that happened to anyone else?
Hmm.
I guarantee if you go on social media and say, this happened to me today and this is how I felt. Does anybody know what I'm feeling? You're going to get a flood of comments, right? Of people. I mean, if you want to boost your algorithm,
Oh
that's the way
wow.
to do it, right? But it's exactly proof and evidence of what you're talking about. Even the smallest hints of vulnerability opens up the floodgates for people who, one, not only want to support you by showing their vulnerability, but two, for people who've probably been praying that somebody else post their vulnerability so that they can join the conversation in a way that maybe doesn't feel as scary to them. And so this is so key when we're talking about what we can do as one person to add to the shifts in culture to make our society more responsive, more supportive, more more empathetic, and to really just rewire so many of the things that I think we've come away from that we need to get back to.
Yeah, and it needs to be our purpose. And I don't
Yeah.
know, and I say that not for the simple fact that I say that or I believe that, but I think the world needs that
Mhm.
because I think we've rolled the facade of we're in control for far too long.
Mhm.
And just with the circumstances and things that are happening, like you were saying, not to delve too far into world events, but this is a different world than I grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't imagine. My mom tells me every day. She's 70s, almost 80s, I think. She tells me it's way different than when she grew up in. And we don't say that for the technology part, and we don't say that for the things that we've learned to do, or some of the special things that we're capable of doing mentally, and what our mind and what we've created and what we've invented.
Mhm.
We say that for the simplicity of humanity, and we're just different. And it to me, it's not looking any better.
Yeah.
It's not looking any better. But am I encouraged by those few that are still continuing to shine their lights? Absolutely. And I'm hoping through vulnerability, encouraging vulnerability, that we'll soon kind of piece this together in some form or fashion that we'll be okay. We'll be all right with someone,
Mhm.
and we'll be able to grow, and we'll be able to see far past. Now, mind you, I think King had this same kind of idea a few decades ago, right? And we're still trying to get this. I have a dream. This that'll never leave my mind. That some of the things he said in that speech was mind blowing. That he was dealing with that back in the '60s, and to
Mhm.
some extent, we're continually dealing with those same anecdotal things that he talked about then that we're doing now. And I'm sure before his time, they were talking about that as well.
Mhm.
And we're at a point now where there's so much other things that are going on without us being vulnerable with each other. No one's going to be able to help anyone.
Yeah.
We're going to be on the outside looking in, with no one to help. And
Mhm.
being that it can, and it starts with you. I do not believe one person do not make a difference.
Mhm.
If I'm on here and it's 800 plus million people on LinkedIn, regardless of to how many on there who've ever seen me or who've ever heard my message, it's a continuation of me continuing to talk about it. Because
Mhm.
if I can change one person's mind, my thought process behind that is hopefully that will be contagious.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will be contagious. And if it catches on, your work is done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's gonna catch. It's
Mhm.
gonna catch, and we can live by that, man. This has been some good stuff, and we've covered some great stuff. But as always, we got Kelley on here. We're talking about teacher brilliance. We want to talk a little bit about this teacher brilliance. And I know your mission is like to help others, right?
Mhm.
And teacher brilliance is about that. Uh, what is the brilliance behind teaching some of the lessons that people have learned from being vulnerable? How can we kind of teach this, even with what we're going to be doing? How can we kind of teach this to others so they can carry this on as well?
That's such a great question, and we've talked about these five things that we can learn from vulnerability, and with the reason why I created Teacher Brilliance is because I recognize that collectively, if we all share our lessons and our expertise, we can actually not only up level the information and the access to information that people have, but it's our way of giving back. We don't learn lessons to hold them in and keep them private. Like, it's really our way to be that one person that decides to give back. And it's no different than the lessons that your mom taught you growing up. There's so much that we hold that we've learned from other people that have shaped who we are, that have shaped our lives, that have shaped what it is that we want to do. And when we're looking at being vulnerable, and when we're looking at the valuable things that people have learned from being vulnerable, the brilliance behind that is that what we were talking about earlier, it's that unique point of view, that unique lesson that maybe has been taught in 100 different ways, but it's that one thing that one person out there potentially has been praying for and looking for, right? If you think about when you get advice, when you ask people for advice, if you think about all of the flood of advice that you're given, and some of it you throw out the window and some of it you put to the side because maybe,
Mhm.
and then there's that one person where you're like, yes, that is exactly what I was looking for, right?
Yeah.
All of these people are giving you advice on the same thing, yet it's that one person's brilliance, right? It's that whatever that one unique shift is that they were able to bring to the conversation because they had gone through it, or they had had a similar experience, or they had been told that piece of advice and now they're gifting it to you. That is the brilliance behind teaching our vulnerability. All of us have such rich lessons that we have learned that we can bring to the table as a contribution to what we gift to others. And we all learn it a little differently. Like, for example, we've all learned about heartache,
Yeah.
but we've all learned about heartache differently. And so, what I would share with my own daughter about heartache is coming from my own experience. What you might share about heartache is coming from your own experience. And one of those things is going to resonate. But that's why I think recognizing it's not about having the expertise like we talked about. It's about bringing in your own vulnerability and sharing it with others as a teacher of lessons, because there are millions of people out there on their knees praying for an answer to something. And what if your one vulnerability that you've chosen to teach is
Mhm.
the exact thing that they're praying for?
And that's the power in it. That's
Mhm.
that's what makes us powerful, and that's what makes what you've done and what you're doing and what you're continually to build on. She'll say we don't learn lessons to hold them in and keep them private. Yes, she's saying, she's quoting you.
I love it.
She's quoting you. And Shell is one of my staunchest supporters, and I definitely support her. And talk a little bit about, we had a few minutes left. Tell us and do this tease. Now, what are you doing for me with this vulnerability micro course and where we're
Yes.
moving?
So, one of the biggest things that I'm following just from the education standpoint is this whole trend of micro learning. And
Mhm.
micro learning is another shift that we're seeing, that is recognizing that people don't want to learn in hour-long lessons. People want a quick 12-minute lesson. Tell me what I need to know so that I can process it and implement it and move on. And the beautiful thing about what we're doing with you, for everybody out there paying attention, because Carl's going to be coming out with some amazing stuff pretty soon. But the beautiful thing about this conversation and talking about micro learning is one of my favorite things to do, which is help people create what we call micro courses. And these are short, bite-sized courses where no module is more than 10 minutes. And when we're talking about lessons that we've learned from being vulnerable, there is no better format than being able to say, like, Shell, your example comes to mind about what you learned about not raising your hand and in being silently curious. And what if you could create 10 5-minute videos to speak to all of those silently curious people out there, to encourage them to reignite their passion and find their courage and start raising their hand and loudly asking questions? Because there are people out there that are silently curious, and potentially they're suffering because
Mhm.
they have so much that they want to ask, and they have so much that they want to learn, and that silence is actually keeping them from growing, like we mentioned earlier. So, what we're doing with you and being able to take all of the amazing things that you have learned through your vulnerability and in the different careers that you've had, and working in the different environments that you've had, and
Mhm.
mixing it with all of that expertise and knowledge, in these micro courses, is really going to put these amazing lessons right at the fingertips of people in quick, bite-sized, consumable ways. Because I know we're having a good time here, and we've had so many people hanging out with us for the last hour, but in all honesty, we can't do this every day all day long.
No.
You know, we really need, there are times where we're like, just give it to me really quickly. Tell me what I need to know to turn this around and move on. And that's what we're creating with all of your amazing insight and expertise is what are those things that people need to know to be vulnerable and to use it as leaders in quick consumable ways that we know all of those people that are going to be on that waiting list for those amazing micro courses you're coming out with
Yes,
are
yes.
going to be able to turn around and implement it. I might be able to watch one of your 10-minute videos on the way to work, and that will make me show up as a different leader to my team that day. And that's where the change happens, right? That's where the brilliance comes in. That's where we really start recognizing that each of us individually can take a part in how we are contributing to the shift that we're needing to see in today's culture.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely. TeachyourBrilliance.com. Go and check Kelley out. She is phenomenal. Once she walk you through something, you're gonna feel more enlightened about the stuff you thought you already knew, right? You're gonna have a new perspective because I thought I was really doing something till she started walking through some anecdotal stuff. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't think of that like that. Oh wow. That's amazing when you can have someone push
Mhm.
you to that place because not all the time we first and foremost, we may not know how. And secondly, we might be a little fearful of doing it. We push ourselves to certain extent. We push ourselves till we're comfortable. Then once
Mhm.
we're comfortable, we're good with where we are and we sit tight, right? But there's always someone that you can have that will push the envelope or push you forward in what you're doing, and you can come back. And that's what coaches and consultants are supposed to
Mhm.
be, push you forward and push you toward a place you said, wow, I didn't even know that I can do that. And a lot of times we sit stuck in where we are for the fear of not being vulnerable enough to tell somebody, I never done that. So you know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know. But she will get you that. Teachingyourbrilliance.com. Go check her out. Go also check her out on her LinkedIn page as well. It's information on there where she can move you to the next level. And you guys keep your eyes peeled because the vulnerability micro course is just coming out. I think Shell said he had her interested. Now she's silently curious about a micro course for herself as well. So we definitely gonna get that in. And we appreciate you guys coming. We
Yeah.
appreciate the questions. We appreciate it all. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. Yes, it
Yes.
is 2 weeks. We are on 2 weeks every other Thursday. I mean, every other Tuesday. Oh my God, I'm moving the weeks ahead
I
already.
was like, are we doing 2 shows? We're gonna do Tuesdays and Thursdays now?
Every other Tuesday, come back for another fly edition of Vulnerability Matters, where me and Kelley break down some more vulnerability tidbits to you
Yes,
and get you involved in moving your life forward so you can be better because vulnerability does matter. So we'll
absolutely.
see you guys in 2 weeks. And on our outro, I'm surprised Kelley with this one because
Oh,
she didn't know this one too.
all
We got a
right.
nice little outro too. You guys have a great one and have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.